Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. It's the 11th of February, 2026, and we have an ongoing hearing in front of the House Judiciary Committee for oversight of Pam Bondi, which is at the moment extremely fiery. We'll talk about it in a second. But the big breaking news this morning has to do with this incredibly bizarre thing that happened in the airspace over El Paso, which, by the way, as we are learning more about it, seems to be a very clear indicator of something that we've been talking about here on this show a lot over the last 15 months or so, which is the total incompetence of this administration. So, brief version of what happened. In the middle of the night, well, actually like late yesterday, the FAA shut down airspace over El Paso and a chunk of New Mexico for what was supposed to be 10 days. And they did it without any forewarning. They did not talk to Veronica Escobar, who is the representative for El Paso. They did not talk to other representatives in Texas who might be implicated, like Joaquin Castro. They did not talk to local officials in El Paso. Nobody had any idea this was coming or what it was about. And then magically this morning at around 9 a.m. Eastern time, that hold that was supposed to last for 10 days was lifted. And again, there was no kind of like explanation, no announcement as to why, and a lot of like WTF kind of floating around. What exactly had happened there? So there's two competing versions of this. One is the propaganda of the administration, and this is literally just coming out right now in Bondi's hearing. And the other is what appears to be a huge snafu between the DOD and the FAA. So Pam Bondi's version of this... Sorry, y'all know sometimes I have to laugh because it's like so freaking ridiculous. Like you can just see it coming that like anything that comes out of their mouth that sounds like this, you just know is false. The claim from Pam Bondi is that there were drones from Mexican drug cartels that the military was trying to deal with. It turns out that what appears to have actually happened is that the Department of Defense at a nearby military base was testing some new military drones and decided that they couldn't keep commercial aircraft safe while they were doing that. And that led to the FAA, through Real World Boston reality TV star Secretary Sean Duffy, to shut down El Paso airspace for 10 days. So this appears to have been kind of like a very big snafu. And I just have to remind you all, this is especially for those of you who watch here who have like conspiracy theories going on that the administration is playing like 6D chess, that actually the whole regime is run by a bunch of incompetent tools. And while they have been able and continue to be able to do some very violent, horrific, fascist things, the vast majority of them have literally no idea what they're doing, right? Like the competing interest right here is the Department of Defense run by a drunk rapist, former Fox News host, and the FAA run by a reality TV show host who has like literally no experience in the realm of transportation. That's the two guys who got us to a place where like all airspace was shut down over the 34th largest city in the United States of America with no explanation, no notification, no warning whatsoever. So keep that in mind when you're like doing your thing about like, it seems impossible to defeat them, right? Because it's not. Keep this incident in mind. Is it inconvenient? Yes. Is it a sign of how poorly managed the administration is? Absolutely. Does it mean that we can win? Yeah. It's like yet another of many recent indications of that. Okay. All right. So that's El Paso. And it was really weird. I have to say as well that like even the air traffic controllers in the El Paso airport are on record saying they had no warning that it was coming. It just completely strange snafu. It's just bizarre. All right. We have a whole bunch of other things we need to talk about today. I'm going to start with the good news first. Many of you know that we have been covering the New Jersey special election here to fill Mikey Sherrill's seat after Mikey Sherrill was elected the governor of New Jersey. Yesterday, Tom Malinowski conceded the race to Ana Lilia Mejia, who is now the Democratic nominee and will most likely walk into the House of Representatives after the election later on this spring with no trouble whatsoever. For those of you who have been following this, you know that soon-to-be Representative-elect Mejia is a first of all, Working Families Party candidate. Second of all, a union organizer. Third, a very specific progressive in the legacy, the ongoing legacy of Zohran Mamdani, believes in impeaching Alito and Thomas, expanding the Supreme Court, abolishing ICE, Medicare for all, and essentially like tribunals to bring this entire regime to justice. And she's about to be my rep from what has historically been a fairly moderate suburban community just outside of New York City. So it's a huge deal. She is running against a wildly disfavored Republican, and Tom Malinowski, who, by the way, you all will remember was the subject of an AIPAC target campaign. They sank $4 million into the local election trying to defeat him because he refused unconditional support to Israel with regard to the genocide in Gaza, has now said that he will campaign against any candidate that AIPAC supports to try to defeat Mejia. And so, by the way, for those who don't know, Ana Lilia Mejia has also come out in no uncertain terms calling what is happening in Gaza a genocide, an ongoing genocide at that. And so they aimed for the more moderate candidate and they ended up with the radical, which I personally think is kind of good karmic justice. So we have a lot going on here that is good news. But the other thing that I will just tell you is that last night she gave an interview where she said that she was undecided about whether she would support Hakeem Jeffries for Speaker of the House if we take back the House in November. And by the way, there's now at least 12 progressives in that bucket. I personally think this is a really good thing. I am really excited about the prospect of, let's just say hypothetically, Speaker of the House, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I think it's about time that, some accountability came for Jeffries and Schumer's unwillingness to fight back against this administration in any way that actually makes a dent. So we have a burgeoning development in progressive electeds right now that I think is also really important. And I'm happy to see Mejia at the front of the line on that. All right. So that's some very good news to carry with you this Wednesday. All right. In other breaking news, we have to talk about the Epstein docs because, as everybody knows, we talked about this on Monday. A number of electeds showed up at the Department of Justice on Monday to look at the unredacted documents. And that continued yesterday and it continues today. All right. And while Pam Bondi is testifying right now, right before I came on the air, Pramila Jayapal was actually on huge poster boards holding up screen grabs from some of these documents that had been unlawfully redacted. All right. So one of the things that happened, and I predicted this was going to happen, and a lot of people naysayed me on Blue Sky, was that Ro Khanna did in fact use the speech and debate clause, as I predicted he was going to do on Monday, and read out loud the 6 names of unindicted co-conspirators of Epstein's that were considered for indictment by the Department of Justice. This is a very big deal. They include, of course, Les Wexner, but also a number of very significant international businessmen who they could apparently track their financial and, transportation support to these international trafficking of minors. So we're only at the bare beginning of this, and there will be much more to come. Now, Ro Khanna did do a series of interviews yesterday on MS Now, where he talked about the fact that there appears to be a double redaction in place. So I want to explain to people how this happened, because this again is yet another sign that this DOJ has incompetently handled the requirements of the Epstein Files Transparency Act and also just basic litigation protocol. All right. So many of you know, if you're new here, you might not, that, back when I was a trial lawyer, I used to handle huge document productions. First, I did them literally myself. with a team of people. I managed teams of other lawyers who were doing this. And then as I advanced in the profession, I supervised electronic discovery procedures on a lot of huge litigations that I worked on, including cases that had like 3.5 million documents of production. All right. So very significant productions that in many cases kind of paralleled the requirements for redaction, but from a business standpoint, as what we're seeing here. Okay. So one thing that I just want to remind people of is that the Epstein Files Transparency Act had limitations on what could be redacted. And again, I have to remind people here, because people lost their shit about this on Blue Sky also on Monday, that the DOJ is in fact allowed to redact from the Epstein Files Transparency Act evidence of death, physical abuse, or injury. Now, that does not mean they are covering up murder. Let me say it again. That does not mean they are covering up murder. It may mean that they have redacted things like Epstein's autopsy photos, which I personally have no desire to see, or photographs of Epstein's body on the floor of his cell. Also have no desire to see. Okay. So all that said, there were limitations on what they could and could not redact. That was one thing they could redact. Also, of course, the names and identities of victims, which they did not effectively redact, which is hugely harmful. There was just testimony about this in Pam Bondi's hearing, like literally like 20 minutes ago. But also, it seems as though they did not do something right here, which is that when the files were initially produced to the DOJ, because they were not initially like at DOJ headquarters, they were being stored through the Southern District of New York offices. They were provided by the FBI and all of that, like the SDNY and the other locations where they might have been stored, to DOJ headquarters with redactions in place. And some of those redactions were like legit redactions of, for instance, the names of victims, photographs of victims, identifying information of victims, like where their parents lived, where they went to high school, things like that. Okay. What the DOJ did not do, and this is where we get to the double redaction problem, is go back to the FBI and the other entities that had stored this evidence as a part of their investigation and say, give us the fully unredacted files. So what that has meant now is that when members of Congress go to look at the documents of the DOJ, the unredacted documents that they're getting still have redactions. And this, again, is a sign of the sheer incompetence, the total incompetence of the people who are actually running this document review. All right. I will just tell you that this is such basic 101 shit that I would have expected as a junior associate at a law firm to have lost my job if I had done what the DOJ has done here. Okay. If your client produces to you documents that are already redacted and you don't know what's underneath them, and you have a legal obligation to only redact certain things, you have to go back and get the unredacted documents, because otherwise you could be violating the law. Or in my instance, violating a protective order by the court, which could get me sanctioned and disbarred. Okay. So it's not just sheer incompetence. It's actually a sign of like really not doing their job. And, you know, one of the things here, I know there are people who are going to be like, this is intentional. I'm not convinced that they're competent enough to even handle this properly. But pointing out that they have failed to comply with the law is, of course, what Jamie Raskin is doing live right now in the House of Representatives, because of the nature of the requirements for their compliance. And again, somebody's already in the comments saying this is intentional. Don't give them that credit. Like, seriously, I got to tell you something. The easy thing for them to do, if they're stupid and they don't have good oversight, because I'm going to remind you that the DOJ has lost hundreds of lifetime lawyers since this administration took over. People who actually know how to do this, people who actually care about this stuff, are largely gone from the DOJ. All right. If they have inadequate oversight, if they have attorneys in place, because there's a lot of them in the DOJ right now who have never been litigators, they would let this go. Not just even let it go. They might not even know what the policies or adequate procedures were for electronic discovery. So again, really key here to remember that, like, yes, they're evil, but they're also wildly incompetent. And yes, there is going to be an opportunity for this to be corrected. Okay. It's going to have to be corrected, because the next step is going to be that the Congress is going to go to court. So, so keep in mind that, you know, we're only getting started on this. And I just want to point out, like, there are reports that, you know, people who have gone to see the Epstein files have seen other things, other types of redactions, other that are unredacted that they can get to, other information that, as we expect, is utterly damning. And I just have to point out that the dominoes continue to fall. Howard Lutnick, who is, of course, our Commerce Secretary, testified yesterday in front of the Congress that notwithstanding the fact that he had publicly stated that he had not had any contact with Epstein since 2005, took his entire family, including his kids and several nannies, on his personal private boat to Epstein Island for lunch in 2012. Might have been 2013, 2012. And, is like, oh, no big deal. And then made this really weird statement. And I left with all my kids. Like, you were going to leave your kids at Epstein Island. Bizarre. Really bizarre. And, on top of it, it's very clear from the Epstein files that have been produced that he had an ongoing relationship with Epstein that was not anything like what he had previously represented. This, by the way, continues to be true down the line. There are businessmen all over the world, like Leon Black, right? Who is, I will just tell you, I read these documents yesterday, do not recommend, is accused of very violent raping of teenagers in conjunction with Epstein, right? Meanwhile, Forbes is still writing glowing profiles about his art collection. Okay. Like the former CEO of Barclays is implicated in all of this, right? So there continue to be dominoes falling. The breadth of the scope of the trafficking is hard to fathom sometimes, even for somebody like me who's done like mass rape cases, mass human rights, wartime rape cases. It's a lot. And there's, a lot of information in there that I really would not want the general public to consume. I'll just say that, it's traumatizing to read it. But I do want everybody to remember that we're really only at the very beginning of this. Okay. Like the fallout has only just started. And for everybody who's like, why won't they do anything? Just wait, and what I mean by that is like people are losing their jobs every day, right? People are being ostracized from circles, professional circles every day. Like, just to give you one humorous example, a dinosaur convention announced on Monday night that they are excluding all paleontologists whose names have shown up in the Epstein files. That there's more than one is even shocking, but there's so many scientists and academics implicated in this, doctors, people who were involved in Epstein's eugenicist plans. It is staggering how many men were involved in this. And a few women. So I do want to just, let everybody know that, there are many, many layers of accountability, right? I've said this many times here. And I know that in America, because of the prison industrial complex and the way that we're all trained to think that it's prison or nothing, that what we think about as accountability is throwing somebody in like a horrible prison, right? All prisons are horrible. They're dehumanizing. We have to talk about that at some other point because, abolition needs to happen because 1 in 5 Black men in this country are incarcerated at some point. All that said, we have to remember that there are other forms of accountability, right? And I want people to start remembering that it's not just about people being thrown in prison. It's also about lots of other things, especially for men who are this prominent, this high achieving, who have hold like places that previously were of like high regard in their profession. So there's a lot more to say about that. And like I said, please remember, this is only getting started. There's 3 million pages that have been produced so far. There's another 3 million currently in the hands of the DOJ. I myself have managed to look at maybe 10,000 pages of the Epstein files that have been produced so far. That's not a lot, and I found things that are like staggeringly bad. So keep in mind, there's a lot more room to go here, and things continue to fall. And yes, somebody's mentioning Casey Wasserman, who, by the way, is the president of the LA Olympics. We talked about this last week, who was apparently Ghislaine Maxwell's boyfriend at certain points. There's all sorts of like sexting in the emails between the two of them, and people are now leaving his talent agency. Chappell Roan has ended her contract with them, as have a number of other major musicians. So again, lots of dominoes are falling. And, I know it's hard to be patient. It's important at this point to recognize that like we only actually know the tip of the iceberg, and it's really gross. And there's a lot more to come. All right. Okay. Let's see. More good news. Yesterday, a grand jury in the District of Columbia declined to indict the 6 members of the House and the Senate who made that video about how the military should ignore illegal orders. This morning, like 18 minutes before I came on the air, there was breaking news that literally zero of the grand jurors reviewing that indictment voted to indict. So I have to remind everybody that the grand juries are actually like one of the bastions of democratic oversight of the judicial system, because in order to indict somebody, evidence has to be presented to a grand jury. And yes, there is like, that long established axiom of like a good prosecutor could get a ham sandwich indicted in front of a grand jury. Not anymore. And I'm very pleased at this point about the fact that, there is going to be there continues to be, actually, because there have been multiple instances of this, a refusal by everyday citizens sitting on grand juries to carry out the Trump regime's demands. So this is very good news. And by the way, Jason Crow put out an F-bomb laden response to this that referred to the administration as those fuckers. I was really quite pleased to see it. But that is some other very good news today. Okay, I want to circle back to something here really quickly, because I'm watching a couple of other things pop up in the comments, and I have to say this. I've said it so many times now on Blue Sky. I'm going to say it here again. Okay. You do not need to adopt conspiracy theories about the Epstein files in order to make this more worse than it already is. Okay. I know that there are a lot of people like losing their minds about the fact that like a lot of sulfuric acid was delivered to little St. John, Epstein Island, in the months before his arrest. All right. I just want to point something out to you. Okay. That is a fertilizer. And, like one thing that is really bothering me right now, and I think I might have even talked about this on Monday, but I'm going to put it in here again as well, because I really need to emphasize this. There is this kind of sick, gleeful, sadistic desire right now to add things to Epstein's MO that do not exist in the evidence. All right. Like, I just have to point this out. Okay. Epstein has a modus operandi. I've talked about this on Blue Sky. I've talked about this here, that spanned like at least 25 years of molesting teenage girls. And that MO was the same every single time. Okay. There is no evidence, no reliable evidence whatsoever in the Epstein files that he was engaged in murdering people. Okay. And I just have to point something else out here. Okay. If you are somebody who has been a criminal prosecutor, right? You're somebody who has been in, like, let's just even say you went to law school and you had to take criminal procedure and criminal law. All right. You know that it is extremely rare, like extremely rare. Okay. That like people can murder more than one person and get away with it. All right. Like, we're all sensationalized by serial killers in this country. Like, there's been so much propaganda about this. It's insane. But those cases are exceedingly rare. Okay. And I just got to tell you, when I see people, including in this audience, speculating about a cabal of, like rich white men murdering babies, eating children. This is another one of these crazy conspiracy theories that's out there, right? What I think about is QAnon and people having psychotic breaks. And I also just have to say this, that from the standpoint of where we sit in relation to all of this, I personally, as a survivor of child sexual assault, find it profoundly offensive that there is a portion of social media right now that thinks what happened to 1,000+ teenage girls isn't bad enough. I'm just going to let that sit there for a minute. Okay. So I want to just make a request here for purposes of like this broadcast, and even for our Patreon feed now, because it's starting to drive me a little crazy. Don't bring that garbage here. The victims deserve better than that. They deserve to be honored for the crimes that have been perpetrated against them. Okay. They deserve to have the truth of his modus operandi be bad enough, because it is bad enough. It's bad enough. Okay. So the random speculation, the thing of like murdering babies, there are rich people are eating babies at this party, says this woman in the lobby of the hotel, right? Leave that off here. Okay. Because like the age range of these victims right now that we know runs roughly from 9 to 17. And there's more than 1,000 of them. That's bad enough. That's bad enough. Okay. And the other thing I'm just going to say here is that every time you talk about something like that, what you are doing is undermining the legitimate cases of the people who have been victimized. Because when it comes out, and it will, that all those kind of conspiracies are bullshit, it will be giving ammunition to the men who want to get away with this, that so is what actually happened. Okay? Really important to keep your head screwed on straight about this. Like, and I'm not signaling, I'm not like, pulling anybody out of the crowd, okay? Because this has happened with like more than a handful of people in this audience and on the Patreon feed. It needs to stop, okay? It needs to stop. All right, let's talk for a second about Fulton County, because the Fulton County raid it's not really a raid, they executed on a search warrant. The underlying affidavit for the Fulton County raid came out yesterday. And you guys, this saga is like, again, this is something that's like totally laughable, because the investigation was begun by somebody who was an engine behind the Stop the Steal mechanisms inside the White House, somebody who was an election denier in 2020, okay? And the affidavit, which is sworn to by one FBI agent, just one, essentially says that they are relying on a bunch of internet conspiracy cranks who claim to have reviewed the voter data in Fulton County and come to the conclusion that there are thousands of missing votes, okay? It is not based on any reliable evidence. It's literally based on a few guys on the internet who have no qualifications claiming that they came up with this miraculously missing number of votes, okay? It's laughable. It's laughable. Now, I watched an interview with Mark Elias yesterday on Deadline White House, and I agree with him that the fact that they got a magistrate judge to sign off on this is, troubling. Quite troubling, actually, because part of the fact that they got a magistrate judge to sign off on this means that there was somebody on the bench who thought that this warrant had legitimacy, or at least like met the basic standard for issuing a search warrant, which is not, by the way, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's really like probable cause. Okay. But even still, there's not really any probable cause for it. So that is something to be a little bit concerned about. But again, I have to remind you all, and we talked about this last week, in order to be able to do this nationwide, they would have to do this in front of like a judge in every single jurisdiction where there was a voting location that they wanted to raid. And so again, we have to be like really clear about the likelihood that this is replicable while simultaneously taking it seriously. And actually, I can't really even take it seriously right now because I read the affidavit and I was like, what? Like, that was truly my reaction to it. It was like, seriously? Are you joking? You're citing this internet loon as the basis for an affidavit to seize the votes in Fulton County from 2020? It's crazy. So I will tell you all that I said at the beginning that I thought that this whole thing was part of Trump's revenge tour, and I stand by that opinion. All right. Somebody asked me a question about the National Governors Association and what was going on in relation to the White House. Okay, so this is another saga. Let me just tell you the background on this. The National Governors Association is invited annually. This is a bipartisan organization of governors to the White House. And ordinarily, their invitation to the White House includes like a black tie dinner and meeting with the president. And they talk about like, all sorts of things. And it's supposed to be kind of like a unifying event. All right. So this year, Trump being Trump, disinvited two Democratic governors, did not invite them. He did not invite Wes Moore, and he did not invite Jared Polis. And the end result of that was that the National Governors Association, which, by the way, is led by one Republican governor and one Democratic governor, declined the invitation for the entire organization to go to the White House. And so this is now like yet another break with tradition. They're still going to have their annual meeting, which they ordinarily have in DC. They're still going to do all of that. But it was, once again, I just have to point this out. So much Trump policy is based on his desire for revenge. Like, he's mad at Jared Polis. He's mad at Wes Moore. And so he's disinvited them. And now the whole Governors Association is like, we're out. But keep that in mind also, is that like, his revenge tour is governing like the entire Department of Justice in a huge part of just national policy. It's crazy. Like, it's crazy. I know it's crazy. And I know that everybody knows that, but it's nuts. It's like really totally nuts. All right. One other thing that I wanted to mention, which is that yesterday, the Moderna, which, saved my life. I don't know how many of you got the shot. but my first 2 shots were Moderna and several of them after, announced that the FDA had rejected their application for certification of an mRNA flu vaccine. And they have, of course, conducted very expensive studies to date on how this flu vaccine works. And it turns out that the flu vaccine, their flu vaccine, is way more effective in older adults than the current flu vaccine on the market. And simply because the FDA is, of course, now being run by cranks, with RFK Jr. at the head of Health and Human Services, we have an FDA that is literally flat out refusing to even consider approving this vaccine. It's horrifying. And I will just point out that, mRNA technology, one of the things that just is really upsetting about this generally is that mRNA technology has huge potential right now. There was a study that was done recently involving people with an aggressive form of breast cancer that were treated with a novel mRNA treatment, and it worked completely. Somebody told me about this on Blue Sky, and I went and looked it up because their friend was cured of an incredibly aggressive form of breast cancer by using this test version of an mRNA vaccine designed for breast cancer, which, by the way, affects 1 in 6 women in this country. So, what's happening has long-term implications, and people are going to die because they're refusing to do this. This yet again is another reason why RFK Jr. has to be impeached. But I want people to know that this isn't the end of the road. Of course, they're going to take the technology to other countries and try to get it approved in other countries. And then, as is wont in late stage capitalism, rich people will be able to travel to get it and other people won't. But this is one of those things that absolutely is going to have to be addressed when we take back the reins of government, because we can't be in a position ever again where the FDA can be run by somebody who believes that vaccines are wrong and evil and doing things that they don't do. All right. Last bit of good news that I have to leave you with today. There was a revolt in Congress last night about Trump's tariffs. And I'm going to take this win. I know there are some negative Nellies who are going to be in the comments about this saying, it's not that much, but I'm going to tell you this is a huge win. Okay. So there was an effort by Mike Johnson to pass a bill that would have stopped Congress from being able to stop tariffs. That's a lot of stops, but that's basically what it was. Would have ended congressional oversight for Trump's tariff policies. And Mike Johnson bumped the vote because he didn't have the votes to do it. And when the vote finally happened last night, it failed. And it failed because 3 Republicans joined with the Democrats to stop this. Okay. This is not the first time that this has happened. In fact, we've seen a lot of breaks with the MAGA base starting to happen inside the Congress over the last few months. The Epstein Files Transparency Act is, of course, one prime example of this, but it's not the only one. So the 3 that broke were Thomas Massie, who, by the way, I disagree with on almost everything, but I think he's being brilliant on Epstein, and he was great on this. Don Bacon from Nebraska and Representative Kiley from California were the 3 that stepped up and voted no. Okay. I just want to say as well that there is an indication now that a rep for the GOP who has been very sick, who is not running again, by the way, in 2026, may be on the verge of resigning. And that, by the way, will take us down to a 0-0 majority in the House of Representatives, meaning there will be no Republican majority if that happens between now and November. So that will shake up the balance of power. I will tell you right now, because I know this is the next question you're going to ask. I have no idea what that means for the Speaker of the House. I don't think we've ever had a situation, not that I'm aware of historically anyway, where, there has been a flat, even vote. I don't know. I have no idea what that means. So I'll do some research and I'll figure it out. But there's an indication that it may not be too long now where the Republicans will not have the majority in the House. And we will have to see what happens next with that. All right. That's it for today. Longer broadcast than usual. Nice to see you all. I will be back here on Friday. Please remember to give this a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. You can also join us over on patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $5 a month to ask me questions in advance of the broadcast. Reminder to our subscribers, if I did not answer your question on the air, I have usually answered it in writing inside our Patreon community. So you can go check it out over there. Please don't come at me for not having answered the question. I really do try to answer everything in writing or on the air, one or the other. All right. And if you're listening on a podcasting platform, please give us a 5-star review and make sure you subscribe there as well. And I will catch you all back here on Friday. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.